You're with Destination Newry. I'm Rowan Hand, and this is Mike Nugent. You're very welcome, Mike.
Thanks very much, Rowan.
You're an enthusiast for family history, certainly, and in the course of exploring your family history, you established links between the Battle of Fürstenberg in the First World War, 1915, and your own family, and Newry indeed as well.
I did indeed, Rowan. It started off as a bit of family history research. And I discovered that two of my great uncles went off to the First World War. And
you're a Newry man, are you?
I'm not. I'm actually from Belfast
originally. From Belfast, yes.
Yeah, and these were Belfast men. The youngest of the two brothers was called James, and he was 17 when he went off to war, and
17.
he was killed, and nothing really was known about him, and that sparked my interest in trying to find out a bit more about it.
How did you know he existed at all?
My grandfather named my father James after him.
Yes.
And I carry the middle name as well.
Yeah.
So I'm
an honourable name to be called after, bearing in mind that at 17 he had the courage.
I agree, yes.
To step up to the plate and
yes,
go there.
Along with thousands of other young men.
Yeah. Mind you, there is a strong feeling that they were lions being led by donkeys, and of course that's often said.
That is often said, but as I've carried out my research, this was a totally new type of warfare they were involved in, because all the British generals that were in charge at that time had all been brought up on open sort of warfare, like in the Boer War, where it was open plains. This was in trenches, and it had never really been done before.
So your lad then, James, tell me about what you discovered of James.
Okay, James went to, he went out to France about December of 1914. The battalion itself was and it's an Irish battalion, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers. They went out to France at the very start, 23rd of August, and they were involved in their first battle on the 26th of August, and basically were on active service right up until this battle that I'm interested in took place. So James would have been involved in a number of engagements with the Germans.
Now, engagement meant what for James before he perished?
That would have been periods in the trenches. What happened basically from January to May, they would have spent 4 days in the trenches and 4 days in rest in a village behind the lines. Now, when I say trenches, the Germans were fairly cunning. They took the high ground whenever the trenches were being established. So the Allied forces were left with a swamp, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were in a swamp. I have my research uncovered guys who were hospitalised with frostbite because they were out in the winter with no proper clothing or.
So there was an inexorable journey towards Fürstenberg.
Yes. Yes.
And that battle, what were the circumstances of Fürstenberg?
Right, well, there were actually 3 battles. They're called the Spring Battles of 1915. And basically the British, it was imposed upon them to assist the French. The French were trying to advance, and British were basically doing diversionary battles. So there were 3 battles. The first one was on the 10th of March, the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle. The second one was on the 9th of May, the Battle of Ober's Ridge. And the third on the 15th, started on the 15th, is the Battle of Fürstenberg that my great uncle was involved in.
He's only a child.
He was only a child, but my research, there's 3. I've discovered 3 17-year-olds in the battalion, and the oldest I've discovered is 46. So, and these are guys from all over Ireland, particularly in the north. A lot of Belfast guys, a lot of guys from Derry, Donegal, a lot from sort of Dungannon, Cookstown, and indeed some Newry men as well.
What were the circumstances of the battle? What was the nature of the engagement?
Okay.
Talk me through the battle.
I'll talk you through it. First of all, I have to take you a week back. The Battle of Ober's Ridge was fought over exactly the same ground as the Battle of Fürstenberg a week before. And of interest to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people watching, another Irish battalion attacked from exactly the same place as the Enniskillings attacked the following week, and that was the 2nd Battalion Royal Munster Fusiliers. Battle of Ober's Ridge was a complete disaster. 12,000 men were killed in one day.
So are we saying the Germans won that battle?
Without doubt.
Without doubt. Okay.
So the following week, again to assist the French, they decided on a new tactic, which was to be a night attack. And the reason they decided on a night attack was that the Enniskillings and other regiments or other battalions were with them, had been in that area for quite some time, and the rationale was that they were aware of the ground. The attack was started at 11:30 p.m.
Did
at
they
night.
go over the top?
They went over the top, yes.
Were they not running into barbed wire and stuff that was in the area between the trenches?
They had a cunning plan. They had the engineers beforehand. This area is covered with ditches. It's very marshy ground. They had engineers beforehand who made bridges for them to get across. But the plan was that they would go out before 0 hour, 11:30, cross the bridges and lie down in no man's land. What you have to remember is there are probably 200 or 300 bodies of Royal Munster Fusiliers, guys who were killed the week before, lying out there. So they went out and lay down in the middle of this.
Among the bodies, the rats and everything.
Yes. At 11:30, they get up and, with bayonets fixed, marched forward, except further up the line where an Indian brigade was, maybe about a mile up the line, an Indian brigade had started a lot of firing on the German lines, and this really alerted the Germans. What happened, if you look at it from the German perspective, they'd been in these trenches for quite some time. They had great fortifications. They had machine guns placed, strategically placed and preset, so that all they had to do was basically push a button. And they had interlocking fields of fire, so that anybody coming would be wiped out. So as the Inniskillings got to their feet, some flares went up from the German side. Night became day just with the flares, and the machine guns opened up. Now, people talk about the Battle of the Somme, and the Somme's very well known by everybody in this country, and nothing really is known about the Battle of Festubert. The Inniskillings on the first day of the Somme had 5 battalions. Now, a battalion's 1,000 men to go into action. The Inniskillings had 5 battalions in the Battle of the Somme. The heaviest casualties any of them suffered was 44%, so roughly 440 men. That's killed, wounded, or missing. The Battle of Festubert, and basically within the first 15 minutes of this battle, the Inniskillings suffered 67% casualties.
Goodness, yeah.
So they had it sort of varies, official accounts vary between 650, 670 men killed, wounded and missing. And one of the missing was my great uncle.
James.
Yeah, and they were basically cut down by machine gun fire.
There's no hope for them, really.
Well, when you say there was no hope, they actually breached the German line.
Did they?
And they held the German line.
But how did they manage to do that? With that sort of interlocked fire and the night turned to day? That's a miracle.
It is a miracle. It is a miracle.
They took part of the German line.
They took part of the German line and held it for 2 days. But grievous losses. Yeah. Grievous losses.
And then after the 2 days, did they lose it then?
No.
They were driven
It
back.
was held. That was held, and then other battalions came and reinforced them. But the Inniskillings had been so badly mauled that they had to be withdrawn. Because one of the things that gets me is he was missing. That's it. The family. He's missing. Nothing is ever. It's not as if he's killed and he's aggrieved and you say, well, he's
no. And that's still the case. He's recorded as missing.
No, he's missing, and then it's missing, presumed dead. And then now,
do you know where the grave is?
There is no grave.
There is no grave.
And I had the good fortune to visit the battlefield, and it's basically just farmland. But I was able to identify exactly where it was, and there's probably upwards of 1,000 men buried in the field. Now, just down from the battlefield is the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who do a fantastic job. They have an edifice called the Luture Memorial to the Missing.
Yes.
And it commemorates all the men who are missing in that area in 1915. There's 13,400 names on it. So that's 13,400 men who have no grave, who are buried in the fields around about.
What did the loss of James, as far as you're aware, do to your family? What's the legend within the family about it?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I can find very little of family history. The obviously my grandfather named my father James. Any family memorabilia, and he would have medals, and there was a scroll which got sent to each family of anybody that was killed. All that would have been in the family home, which was in Percy Street in Belfast. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, in Easter 1941, Germans dropped a bomb on it, on the house, and everything was destroyed. So you often wonder what we ever did in the Germans.
What you ever did in the Germans? Yeah, I can understand that.
So there's really nothing that exists.
Have you been able to establish what it was within your family that allowed a young man, 17, a boy, to have the courage to get up and go? What drove him to go? And his colleagues, really, as well.
Well, in common with a lot of young men at the time, it seemed like a great adventure. You know, that's you know, my great uncle was a message boy in inner city Belfast, and this must have seemed like a great adventure. And in fact, anecdotally, I know that his older brother Robert, who was also killed, was already in the army. Yeah, and that would have been an incentive for him, obviously. But I know anecdotally that he went to a recruiting office when he was 16, and his eldest sister was dispatched to bring him back.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
So
yeah,
he did go when he was 17.
It's a terrible beauty, isn't it?
It is.
If you think about it.
It is, yes.
The beauty of the courage, the beauty of the adventure, and the terribleness of the ending of it.
Well, that's it. And really these people, when they were Inniskillings were in the trenches and they knew they were going to attack, they knew what had happened to the Munsters the week before. So they'd have known that, in all likelihood, we will not survive this. Yeah.
There was no... I know the answer to this, but logic requires me to put the scenario forward, that they would have said to their officers, look lads, Captain John, we're going over the top, the Inniskillings were over the top last week, we're all going to die here, it's as plain as the nose in your face. This is suicide, should we not reconsider? Would that sort of conversation have occurred?
It would never have occurred.
Never?
Never. It was very much a military, it's a patriarchal organisation. You do what you're told. It's not a democracy. You're told to go over the top. And the other interesting things, and something I've found of great interest, the officers weren't much older than my uncle. Some of the officers who were killed were 19.
Would they have died proportionately in similar numbers?
Officers actually had a higher rate because the Germans targeted officers with the rationale that if they killed the officer, the men would turn back.
Yeah, they'd be leaderless at that stage.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. And now, this is one element of your research into the battle. Where else has your genealogical investigations led you?
Well, this is my main focus at the minute, and what I want to do, because when I started out the research, I found that there's very little written about the battle. Now, for example, the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers have a history of their experience in the First World War. It runs to 300 pages.
Oh yes.
There's 2 paragraphs about this battle.
Yeah, that needs...
It's very little detail.
Are you going to do it?
Yes.
Yeah. Where are you in the research at the moment?
I have... I'm basically at the end of my research and ready to start writing some drafts. But and hopefully what I want to do is a factual account with some personal stories, and I've got some personal stories from newspapers and from the places like the National Archives.
Is there an Inniskilling museum?
There certainly is, yes.
And where do you dip into that?
They have been of great assistance there in Inniskilling Castle.
In the castle.
And as I mentioned to you, the Inniskillings are from all over Ireland, particularly the north. And as I say, strong contingent from Belfast, from Derry, Donegal, Cookstown and Gannon. A young fella actually was killed the day before the battle from Cecil Street in
Newry.
In the city here, yes. 21-year-old called Peter McGuigan.
That's a great Newry name.
It is indeed.
Peter McGuigan. There's a Peter McGuigan walks the streets of Newry today.
Is that right?
Absolutely, you know.
Maybe a relative, you never know.
I would think so. Newry had a great history of service.
Well, it certainly did.
You know, there was a book, the council brought out a book not so very, very long ago of Newry's war dead. It's a huge tome. It was a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, that was just the way of it, you know. So the book, this will come into a book for you.
It will. That's my plan, and I hope to be able to publish by May 2015, and that will be the 100th anniversary.
Which why wouldn't you?
Well,
you will be able to do it because in discovering what you've discovered already, you've discovered the nuggets.
Yes.
You know, the choice elements. It's now a matter of building on those. You know.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
From your own perspective, both within the family circle and from within the knowledge you have of the war, what's your take on that war, that great war? What do you think? Should it have happened? Should it not have happened? Was it a waste of lives? Was it a great courageous escapade, a voyage of Valhalla, so to speak?
It was certainly a waste of lives.
Could it have been done differently?
People denigrate Field Marshal Haig a great deal. And certainly at the Battle of Ober's Ridge, he did some very stupid things. Like he put men in where there was no possibility of any advance when a lot of guys had already been killed. So, you know, he can be chastised for that. But he was also innovative. He used the Royal Flying Corps, for example, to carry out reconnaissance. And you know, it was basically a man in a cardboard and string plane holding a camera, which was nearly the size of this table over the side. Yeah. And then they transcribed it into maps, and that was a massive leap forward for any sort of tactics in warfare. And as I said, trench warfare was just basically something that was new, and they had to try. If that didn't work, they would try something else. So for example, bombardment. Accepted that you had a bombardment before the battle started. The Battle of Neuve-Chapelle and the Battle of Ober's Ridge, they had a bombardment for half an hour.
Scarcely long enough.
No. So for the Battle of Festubert, they decided to have a bombardment for 36 hours.
Yeah.
Because the weather was bad, they extended it to 60 hours.
Yeah.
But that wasn't 60 hours shells going over for the 60 hours. They did 2 hours and then stopped for 4 hours. The other problem was, and that's one of the other large disgraces that I've found out, the amount of shells that were faulty.
Faulty shells.
That did not explode. And a lot of them were made in the USA, believe it or not. But they just didn't explode. So, before the battle, I have a record from the battalion that was alongside the Enniskillings. They sent out a patrol in the dead of night and came back and said the German wire has not been touched.
So 36 hours of bombardment
did
nothing at all.
So, but all these things were innovative for the time.
Of course.
So,
and if it had worked, the bombardment was a damn good idea.
It was certainly
super idea.
A super idea.
Yeah. What was James armed with when he was in the trench and over the top?
He had what was called an SMLE, a short magazine Lee Enfield rifle.
Now that was capable of delivering what?
There's a clip of 5 bullets went into that, 303 caliber rifle.
303, 5 bullets. Then you'd have to load again.
Another clip, just
another clip.
And
how many clips would he have carried?
They would have carried on any day. They would have carried 100, but they carried an extra 120.
So they would have 220 clips.
220 rounds
within the clip.
Yes, and 45 clips.
45 clips.
And the bayonet.
And the bayonet. And they were facing the machine gun fire of the Germans with those clips.
Now, another interesting point, you see all the World War I footage and the guys with the steel helmets. And,
of course.
They didn't have any steel helmets in 1915. It was just your cap.
Your cap and nothing else.
So basically, we're dressed as we were dressed, trousers, a tunic, and a cap.
Yeah.
And that's it.
The 11th, all of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and the cenotaph celebrations and rememberings, that must be quite poignant for you.
It's poignant for me, but I think it's poignant for the whole country, and you can only see from the coverage that's on the television at the minute surrounding the First World War and the interest that's being shown, because basically everybody, you mentioned there that Newry had a great
oh yes, a great
history.
record.
I came across a record there in April 1915. It was a news cutting. Newry had 867 men in the army and navy, obviously a big navy town as well. And for a small town at that time, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of men. So not only for myself, but for other people, you know, throughout this island, and obviously in Britain as well.
But things moved along apace, because those who had gone from the south, they now stand tall in the pride of their people south of the border,
yes,
and the Garden of Remembrance and all of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. From this distance, what kind of person would you say James was?
As a young man, looking for a bit of adventure, looking to, obviously proud of his elder brother, who was already in the army.
Seeking to emulate him.
Seeking to emulate him, yes. And you know, must have had a lifetimes of experience before he was killed. And maybe that's what he was seeking.
In relative terms, he's not all that far removed from you, in the sense of time passing by. Have you a sense of a family sense with him still? Anything
so.
there?
Very much so.
Really?
Well, he's you know, the name being carried. My father was named after him.
Yeah.
My grandfather actually was very bitter, and never would buy a poppy. Never would.
What made him bitter?
He
lost his son.
No, it was his brother. That would have been his brother.
His brother.
His older brother, and he probably subscribed to the common feeling that Haig was a butcher, and the poppies, for example, were it was called the Earl Haig Fund. So he refused.
Yeah.
He refused. But you know, my father was named James, and I carry it as a middle name, and that gives me a connection.
We salute your uncle, James Nugent, this morning, and wish you well. You must do this book.
I will do it, yes.
And you come back with a book here.
I will indeed.
In a year's time. James, God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
What a story. What an